Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cheney-Lippold. As stated, I'm an associate professor of digital American culture, as well as a participant within the Digital Studies Initiative Institute, whatever you want to call it. I'm very interested in digital, and I don't have a title for my talk. So let's just think about it as a hodgepodge, what I'm going to say next. A lot of it is stuff maybe you've heard before, if you've heard me talk. It's stuff that I've been grappling with for the past several, 5, 6, 7 years, but it's also stuff that I felt might be comparable to think through along these different lines of scholarship about how maybe the digital provides not a new necessarily, but a distinct way of understanding politics and thus understanding difference. Go back to the second slide after this. This is a quotation by Melvin Kranzberg. It's a very famous quotation. It's the first law of technology. I use this precisely because Sophia Bruckner took my other one, which was on a Haraway, talking about how technology is not neutral. I want to think about this not just in terms of it's neither good nor bad nor neutral. I just want to think that technology has no common vocabulary. There's no common vocabulary that we can use to talk about Instagram or Snap or whatever, but also there's no common vocabulary we can necessarily use to talk about the digital and the non-digital. So I want to think about that in terms of empowerment and redefinition. I think that power does something to technology that is very constitutive. It, one, reproduces biases, as has been explained by several scholars already mentioned, but it also does the things of, again, what Chen says, laundering asymmetries into its final product, but evacuating the histories of asymmetries so they just come out as a clean element. This is a very, very, very famous, and for me, my favorite example of digital culture that I showed in every class I have, video called HP Computers Are Racist. It's a 2009 video that has Wanda Zeman on the left, who uploaded the video on YouTube, and Desi Cryer on the right. They're two employees at an unnamed Texas retail store, and they were using an HP Media Smart computer. That computer had state-of-the-art, big quotations around that, facial recognition software that was, maybe see where it's coming, it identified Wanda Zeman perfectly. When Desi Cryer's face came into frame, it completely stopped. All of the zooming that was happening, stopped, and it became then just a normal camera. No facial recognition, nothing. And he said, I put it here, HP computers are racist. And it is true. It's completely true. The problem is probably the training data that was used, it's the algorithmic assessments that were based on often white gazes. It's the engineers in Silicon Valley who are completely misrepresentative of the actual population. So digital technology, in the ways that especially algorithms produce knowledge, launder these biases in so that it reproduces the stuff that we've heard for centuries about post-colonialism, Frantz Fanon, Simone Brown, Sylvia Wynter. People talking about how the human is not a neutral, common thing. It has layers that precede it and layers that follow it. In my interest, I'm also thinking about how algorithms redefine things, how algorithms redefine identity, reproduce and redefine. In this case, you see still from face.com, it's a 2010 still from a company that has just been bought by Facebook for several tens of millions of dollars, that not just says if or if not, our friend Dawson here has a face, which is 78% true, but what his gender is, glasses, lips, mood, smiling, even in the grade, you can see his estimated age and also the max and minimum. And the important thing is that these are not true. These are, as almost expressed by Justin too, like the idea of statistical probability. Your probability can be 100% or 0%. It's always going to be in the middle. It's always going to be something that a percentage buffet by which some person's going to have to decide, this is enough, this is the threshold by which we're going to say, yes, that is a sufficient thing to call this person a face, or to say that this person is smiling or is happy, which obviously he's not. We can extend this mode of analysis to companies like Quantcast. It's an analytic company from San Francisco that assesses users' gender and college education level based on things like websites visited, device used, apps used. So this is useful as an exemplar because not only does it show the kind of hollowness in the evacuation of these histories, but it also at the bottom it says actual models include hundreds of factors. There's something very productive in thinking about these algorithmic identifications because you were never just a college graduate. If you start to go to a bunch of lowbrow sites, then big air quotations, you might actually lose your college degree in this algorithmic form. You can change your gender, you can change your education accordingly. In this case also we see the audience breakdowns that Quantcast gives sites that allows people to produce content based on these assumptions of who the audience is. So here we see not only gender, but we see age, we see political affiliation, we see again college, we see how much money somebody's making. The idea being if people come to a site who are really, really rich, it might not be that they're actually rich, they're just seen rich. There's this kind of asymmetry of how we understand it, and thus a misrepresentation if we try to use old vocabulary to talk about these new phenomena. This is best expressed in the 2016, they call it a feature, but obviously it's a bug, ethnic affinity Facebook profiling opportunity where it allowed people to use the Facebook platform to advertise or to give people personalized content based on their assumed ethnicity. There's two important things to note here, one of which is the glaring omission of any whiteness whatsoever, which obviously assumes some sort of default status for the white body. But two, what it does is it uses this interesting vocabulary, ethnic affinity. It's not ethnicity, it's affinity for one's ethnicity, or for an ethnicity. At the end of the day, though, what it is an assemblage of different things that you liked on your Facebook page. It's not necessarily shared heritage, a sense of belonging, or the things that historically understood ethnicity as a productive and important point of resistance. Facebook also does this with class. This is a patent that Facebook put to determine, quote, what is the probability that a user is in the middle class? And it begins with an interestingly vulgar intersectional analysis. It doesn't take classes at the beginning. What it does is it takes age as the beginning, routes it throughout their devices or home ownership, and then eventually to education or where that home is owned. More simply, the actual amount of devices you have produces your class, and so paradoxically, you spend more money on devices, you actually become more and more wealthy. All of these embody the conceptual move that C. Baker calls corrupt segmentation, and I want to do a shout out to Christian Sandvik, who I don't think is here today, who gave me this topic and gave me this idea based on a blog post he has on corrupt personalization. I think it was 2013, a very useful post. But nonetheless, Baker's talking about how segmentation is always going to be developed according to something often beyond the values and needs of the group that's being segmented. In this case, it's the steering mechanisms of bureaucratic power or money. In this case then, when we're talking about something, and when power's talking about something, we differentiate those for the moment, we might not be talking about the same thing. We actually might be talking about something that's extraordinarily different. This is much more understandable if we look at the existence of the NSA's algorithm for citizenship, which we found out in the 2013 Snowden documents, especially in the PRISM documents, that detailed on the top, if you can read this, that in the huge assemblage of surveillance that the NSA was conducting, they had no ability to determine who was a citizen and who was a foreigner. Under the ostensible auspices of the Constitution, U.S. persons, not necessarily citizens, but U.S. persons deserve the right to privacy, and any surveillance requires some sort of legal precedent or legal warrant. And the case is, well, how do we attend to a fact that the surveillance of the PRISM program, for example, surveils everyone? It has everybody that's in their mall. There's no way for you to understand, if you're an analyst at the NSA, if a person's a citizen or foreigner. We don't surf with their passports or birth certificates attached to a monitor or implicit in their Facebook profiles. So the way they did that is actually quite interesting. In 2009, there's an Eric Holder signed document that actually shows how the definitions of foreignness are allocated within the NSA. The first one we're going to look at is if your IP address is existing outside of the boundaries of the United States. So if you go on a vacation, for example, you're becoming more foreigner. If you use encryption or steganography, you also become more foreigner. Essentially, things that have nothing to do with citizenship at the end of the day. Also, if you are talking to somebody who is also reasonably believed to be a foreigner, which is interesting, because you are a foreigner, but somebody who's 51% reasonably believed to be a foreigner. If you have somebody on your buddy list, again, this is 2009, we can assume this is Twitter followers, or this is Facebook friends, you are becoming more and more foreign. And most damningly, in 2008, O Globo, a Brazilian newspaper, found out that if you speak anything other than English, you become more and more foreign. So it produces this, going back to the HP Computers as racist example, this horribly exemplar notion of what is the ideal citizen. It is a person who stays within the boundaries of the United States, never improves their communication, never talks to anybody who even perceived to be a foreigner, and only talks in English. Who's the obverse? Maybe who's a citizen but might be interpreted as otherwise, potentially a diaspora community, potentially Central American who lives in Nevada, who communicates and travels with their family in Nicaragua, speaks Spanish, encrypts the communication because both states are untrustworthy, determining nonetheless the idea that they might be a U.S. person, U.S. citizen in heart, but algorithmically, according to these corrupt interpretations, they become foreigner nonetheless. This is very well done in an artistic formation. If you follow the work of James Bridle, who worked a little bit with me to determine this, to make this browser plugin that actually calculates your algorithmic citizenship based on the website you visit. Again, it's an artistic rendering, so it's not at all about how the NSA does it, but it's suggestive to the fact that as we produce data, we're producing not only information that becomes aggregated into some sort of data valence system, but it is nonetheless used to produce new knowledges, ideas of who we are that are 100% potentially different from who we are and who we want to be. Which leads us to eventually how I'm trying to think about politics as I move forward with my research, which is using the work of the accidents. This is conversations that I've had with Justin Jock about this for years, thinking about what are the new ways we can understand algorithms as proceeding in the future, and I'm taking this quotation from Catherine Malibu to think through what is the difference with the algorithm, how can we understand it as producing knowledge that might be accidental in a way that's productively used outside of the common vocabulary that when we talk of citizenship, in the offline world, we're talking about citizenship in the online. We're talking about gender in the offline world, we're talking about gender in the online. I'm going to argue, and I'm thinking about this more and more as I especially consider I'm researching autonomous cars and especially the Tesla algorithm for automatic driving, how it is that a car, when it's trying to assess what's in front of it, is not going to understand it on the level that we understand. It's going to understand the level of hues and patterns and the deep learning that has understood what an object is, what a stop sign is, for example. I had a couple videos I wanted to show, but for the sake of time, I think I'm going to end it there. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the presentations. Thank you.